Hi, church. Welcome to today's devotional. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6, the writer of Hebrews says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." I love Abraham. He is referred to as the father of faith for good reason. I think it was about the age of 75 when he seemed to be taking stock of his life. He was wealthy, he was powerful, but he had no son. In fact, despite all of the blessings that he was experiencing in life, he was down and discouraged, thinking, because I don't have a son, I'm going to have to leave all of my possessions to a servant. But I want you to listen to what Genesis chapter 15, 4 through 6 say. Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Now, just a reminder again, at this point, Abraham had no children, and God is saying, look up at the stars in the sky. You're going to have that many descendants. And then in verse 6, we hear the faith of Abraham. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. He had faith, which is simply taking God at his word, living as though everything that God says is true, whether it's happened or not. Abraham didn't know how, Abraham didn't know when these things would happen. He just acted as though God's word was a sure thing. That's faith. Interestingly, Paul borrowed these words from Genesis 15 when he addressed Jewish Christians who were still trying to trust how well they could keep the law in order to please God. He reminded them that Abraham was justified by faith when he didn't do anything but accept God at his word. Romans 4 and verse 3. James used the same passage, but for a different reason. He was addressing believers with a lazy belief. He reminded them that faith, true faith, will always be demonstrated by obedience. That it's not faith alone. It's not simply saying, "I believe." James 2, verse 23. So what happened with Abraham? Roughly 24 years later, he was still waiting for the son of promise. He had a son named Ishmael that came along when Sarah seemed to panic, thinking that God needed her help to fulfill his promise. So here was Abraham, almost 100, and Sarah, almost 90, and God told them that within a year, they would finally have the son of promise. Abraham's reaction? Genesis 17:17. Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. How could I become a father at the age of 100, he thought? And how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old? You see, it's in these moments that we must choose either faith or fear. Fear is contagious. It's what we saw with the hoarding of toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic. There was no reason for such a reaction, but that's what happens when fear takes over. You become suspicious. You become self-protective. You become controlling. You don't let God be God. You don't live by faith. You see, in these moments when fear takes over, you're unwilling to take the risks of faith. There's an unwillingness to be a light, to share Christ. There's an unwillingness to be obedient and do unfamiliar and uncomfortable things. Fear paralyzes. That's why fear and faith cannot coexist. Even though Abraham laughed, he did something full of faith. And this is in Genesis 17:23. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and circumcised them as God told him. In other words, Abraham kept the terms of the covenant that God had made with him, even though he had no idea how God was going to keep his word of having a son of promise. But God kept his word. A year later, Abraham was changing diapers and burping a baby. So when God makes a promise, accept it as fact. That's faith. When he promises to forgive and cleanse, accept it by faith. When he promises that Jesus will come again, accept it by faith. When he promises that he will be with us wherever we are and whatever we go through, accept it by faith. When he promises that he has given us his Spirit to live within us, accept it by faith. When he has promised that we will reap what we sow, accept it by faith. When he promises that he will reward our faith, accept it by faith. Count on it. Don't ever let fear cripple you. Live by faith. God bless you.